Grace Parker grew up in the quiet suburb of Chicago, where everything was neat, predictable, and structured. She was raised to believe in tradition, in a carefully laid out future where she would marry someone respectable, someone who fits the mold of their society. But she never imagined that her heart would betray those expectations and led her into the arms of a man so different from everything she had known. Mark Thompson was a soldier, strong, disciplined, and impossibly kind. His deep laughter rumbled like a thunder, and his dark eyes held the warmth that made her feel safe. From the moment they met, he was unlike anyone she had ever known. While others saw their differences because she was white and he was African, Grace saw a man whose heart was pure, whose love was unwavering. They defied the stares, the whispers, and the raised brow that followed them wherever they went because of their color. Love was all that matters, and Grace never cared if he was dark-skinned. So when Mark got down on one of his knees and asked her to be his wife, she said yes without hesitation. Their love was passionate, beautiful, and whole. It wasn't easy, but they faced the world together. And when Grace discovered she was pregnant, Mark's joy was boundless. "You are going to be the best mother," he told her, pressing his hand on her stomach as though he could already feel the life growing within her stomach. But fate was cruel. Mark was deployed for service. The war called him away from their home, from the family they were building. On the morning he left, he kissed Grace like he would never see her again, his hands trembling as he held her close. "Wait for me, Grace," he whispered. And so she waited. Months passed, her belly swelled with their child. Every letter from him was a lifeline, a reminder that he was out there fighting to come home. But the world does not always grant happy endings. On the very day Grace brought their son to the world, she had the worst nightmare of her life. The knock on the door came just hours after she had cradled her newborn baby for the first time. Two uniformed men stood there, their face heavy with sorrow. She immediately knew before they spoke. "Mrs. Thompson, we regret to inform you," the words, blood, drowned beneath the sound of her own heartbeat hammered into her ears. The walls closed in around her. Mark, her husband, was gone. She screamed, but no sound came out. The pain was too vast, too consuming. Her body had barely healed from childbirth, but the wound in her heart was far too deep to heal. Her dear, lovely husband had gone, and she had just bore him a child. She should have been holding him, not an empty promise of his existence. She turned to the child in her arms. The son Mark would never ever meet again. But all she saw in this child was him, and a painful reminder of what she had lost. His dark skin, his full lip, his strong African features. The son she bore for Mark, her husband, did not look like her. He looked exactly like Mark, her late husband, the man she had lost, the man who was never coming back again. And with the realization came something dark and twisted. She resented her child. She named her child Jacob, but she never truly called him that. She barely held him. She barely looked at her child. The crying of her newborn, the soft goggles that should have filled her heart with love, only filled her with more and more pain and hatred. Every time she touched her child, she felt her husband's absence. Every time he cried, it echoed the emptiness she felt inside her. She could not love this child. She could not bear it. And so one evening, she walked into an orphanage with nothing but a rat bundle in her arm. "I can't take care of this child," she said, her voice hollow and crying. She dropped the child with the orphanage owner and didn't look back again. She built a new life, remarried, had other children, and with time, she convinced herself it had been for the best. Jacob was just a baby when he was left behind, and by the time he was old enough to understand the world, he knew he was different. He had no family, no mother who would tuck him in at night no father to teach him how to ride a bike. The orphanage was his home, but it never felt like one. The place was overcrowded, filled with children who had been abandoned for some reasons they never understood, just like him. The walls were cracked, the bed creaked with the weight of too many small bodies to share the bed with, and the air smelled of something stale, something forgotten, sometimes of urine. He learned quickly that kindness was a rare currency, food was limited, and if you weren't fast enough, you were going to stay hungry. The other kids ruled the dormitory, taking whatever they wanted from the smaller ones. Jacob learned to fight, not with fists, but with resilience. He learned that crying got him nothing, that expecting love only led to disappointment. When he was 5, he clung to the hope that a family would come for him. He saw white couples enter the orphanage looking for a child to love, but when they saw him, because of his color, they always walked past him. Sometimes they would smile, and when they saw his skin, the light in their eyes would dim. One day, a woman with golden hair knelt before him, her voice soft. "You are a beautiful boy. What's your name?" "Jacob," he whispered. Her finger brushed his cheek. "You remind me of someone I once knew." Hope bloomed in his heart, but then she stood and her husband took her hand, shaking his head. "Let's keep looking. I don't want this child." And just like that, the woman walked away. Jacob never forgot that moment. It was the day he learned that love, the kind that took you home, wasn't meant for boys like him. By the time he was 10, the orphanage had hardened him. He no longer waited by the door when new visitors arrived. He no longer imagined a mother would come looking for him or someone would love him. He learned to survive. At 13, he found solace in book. He would sneak into the tiny orphanage library where dust coated the shelves and read under the dim lights. Stories became his escape. He devoured books on science, medicine, and human anatomy, fascinated by the idea that hand could heal what was broken. But survival wasn't just about escaping into pages. At 14, he started working small underpaid jobs that barely earned him anything. The orphanage provided bare minimum, but he wanted more, and he needed more. He washed dishes at a run-down diner, mopped floor in an old church, and even ran errands for mechanic down the streets. At 16, life nearly broke him. A fight broke out in the orphanage one night. A boy much older than him cornered him in the hallway, demanding a few dollars he had saved from work. Jacob refused. The first punch knocked him into the ground. The second split his lip open. Jacob wouldn't cry. He didn't beg, he just stood back, blood dripping from his mouth, as he stared into the boy's eyes with unshakable fire. It was the night that Jacob made a promise to himself, but fate had more suffering in store for him before his luck would change. At 17, the orphanage director called him into her office. She had a grim look on her face. "You are almost 18, Jacob," she said. "You have to leave very soon." The world hit him like a knife on his chest. The government stopped funding children in orphanage after they turned 18, she said. Yet he had no home, no family, no safety nets, and he was going to be thrown into the streets, the cold streets. In just a few months, he was going to be homeless. He needed a way out. So one cold autumn night, when fate finally intervened, Jacob had finished his shift at the diner and was walking back home when he heard someone crying from a nearby alley and crying for help. He stopped. Lying on the ground, clutching his chest, was an older man in suit. It seems as if he just collapsed and woke up from his collapse and was holding his chest and was asking for help. Blood began to come out from the man's mouth. Jacob hesitated for a second before he ran to the man's side. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man gasped, his breath laboring. Heart, my heart. Can you help me, please? Can you help me? Please, please." Jacob had read enough medical books to recognize that this was a heart attack. He ripped the man's jacket up, opened his chest, raised his head up, and decided to help him. And then he also saw that the man also fell on a sharp metal railing, and quickly, using the ripped shirt, he tied it against the wound that was bleeding, and then he grabbed the man's wrist, feeling for a pulse to check if it was fading. The man was weak and fading. Life was quickly going out of him. Jacob had no medical degree, no formal training, but he had some knowledge from the books he had read. "Stay with me," he urged. "Stay with me, man. Stay with me." He urged, counting the man's breath, stabilizing him as best as he could. He flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to call for an ambulance. By the time the paramedics arrived, Jacob had done everything in his power to keep this man alive. 2 days later, Jacob was called to the hospital. The man he had saved was none other than Dr. Richard Meyer, one of the most renowned neurosurgeons in the whole of the country. "Sit down, young man," Dr. Meyer said, lying on his hospital bed. "You saved my life." His eyes were full and he looked at Jacob. "You saved my life. Thank you very much." Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I just did what I could do, sir." Dr. Meyer smiled. "And that's more than most would have done. Tell me, Jacob, have you ever thought about becoming a doctor? The way you handled me looks as if you had experience in medicine." Jacob had pounded. "Every day," he admitted. "But I don't know how I'm going to become that. I'm about to be released from the orphanage. I have no parents to help me." Dr. Meyer studied him. "I can help you." And just like that, his world changed. Dr. Meyer took him in, paid for his education, mentored him and guided him through medical school. Jacob had to work harder than most people. He had to fight for every opportunity to prove himself over and over. But he thrived. Years passed. And one day, the orphan boy who had been abandoned by his mother became Dr. Jacob Thompson, one of the leading neurosurgeons in the country and one of the youngest ever. He had made it. He had survived. But fate wasn't done with him yet, because the woman who had once thrown him away now needed to be saved by him. Grace Parker never thought she would ever see her son again. She had buried the past long ago, had built a life without Jacob, and didn't even care if her son existed. She had convinced herself that she did what was necessary for her at that time. But time was cruel, and fate had a way of unearthing the sins we try to forget. Grace was now in her late 50s. Her once radiant beauty had faded. Lines of time and regrets carved into her pale skin. She had everything: wealth, a husband, children from her second marriage, yet something always felt off. Then one day, the doctor found it. A shadow on the brain scan. A tumor. Inoperable, a tumor, and very fatal, they told her. Unless what? She said, asking the doctor. "Unless we are going to be treated by the best neurosurgeon in the country." She had the money, she had connections. It only took a few calls for her to arrange consultation with the world-renowned Dr. Jacob Thompson. The name meant nothing to her. All she wanted was to be well. But fate was already at work. On the day for the appointment, she arrived at the hospital, her heart pounding as she was led through the pristine white hallway. The air smelled of antiseptic, cold and impersonal. "Dr. Thompson will see you now," the nurse said, opening the door to the office. Grace walked in and froze. The man stood by the window, his back to her. Pressed in a crisp white coat, he turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting her with a calm, unreadable expression, as if she was looking at a ghost. The air left her lungs. Him, tall, confident, a grey scar from the same bone structure as the man she had once loved. This must be a mistake. But no, it wasn't. He looked exactly like her late husband, Mark. Her breath hitched. No, this can't be. This couldn't be. Her mind screaming at her, telling her that she was imagining things. But deep down, something in her heart, something primal, something maternal, knew the truth before he even spoke. He looked so much like his father, and just like that, the past she had buried came surging back, ripping through her like a tidal wave. Her knee weakened. She reached for the chair to steady herself. Jacob sat across her, folding his hand on his desk. His voice was smooth, personal, and cold. "What seems to be the issue, Mrs. Parker?" Mrs. Parker, not Mom, not even Grace, just Mrs. Parker. Tears burned in her eyes. Her lip parted, but no words came out. "He doesn't even recognize me," she thought widely. "He doesn't even know me." But then she saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. He didn't know, and he doesn't even care. Her heart squeezed painfully. And then she opened her mouth and said, I have a tumor, she whispered, feeling like the air in the room had turned to lead. They say I don't have much time except unless you work on me. I read your file. His tone was clinical, distant. You need an operation, a very difficult one at that. She swallowed hard, nodding very fast. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she needed to explain to her son sitting in front of her. I never stopped thinking about you, she blurted out, very quiet like a whisper. But Jacob's expression didn't change because he never heard what she said. She searched his face for something. She was looking for either anger, sorrow, or anything, but there was nothing of such, just silence. And in that silence, the weight of her past came crashing down. The baby she had abandoned, the little boy she had left to fend for himself. The young man who had suffered in an orphanage, unwanted, unloved, was here, sitting in front of her, not broken, not bitter, just untouchable. She wanted to say she was sorry. She wanted to take it all back. And then she blurted out, "I'm your mother! I'm so sorry. It had to come out this way," she said, crying. "I regret everything I did. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I was so young. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking. Please, Dr. Jacob, please forgive me. I'm your mother." His expression turned dark, but remained unreadable. "You don't need to explain, Mrs. Parker," he said. "I'll perform the surgery." Her heart squeezed with hope. "You will?" He nodded. "Yes, that's my job. I have to do my job." She waited. She waited for something more. Waited for him to understand, to say he forgave her. But nothing came. "You should get some rest before your procedure," Dr. Jacob said, standing. "A nurse will take you to your room." She rose slowly. She wanted to touch him. She wanted to reach out to him. But she was afraid of how far he had gone and how distant he had become. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Jacob, please, say something. Say something, my son, please, anything." He stared at her for a very long time and quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "You left me," he said, his voice void of emotion. "You made your choice." She flinched. "I was grieving. I lost your father. Please understand, my son." "Don't call me son. I lost both my parents that day." His tone was calm. Yet it cut deeper than any shout could ever be. Her lips started to tremble. I'm sorry, please. I'm sorry." Jacob tilted his head, considering her. "I don't hate you," he said. For a fleeting second, hope surged in her chest. Then he added, "But I don't forgive you. You chose to abandon me. You chose your path. So let it just be as it is. I don't know you. You are just a regular patient, and I'm going to operate on you. Just let it be. I don't want to have anything to do with you." The world shattered her. She felt the weight of her own mistakes pressing down on her, heavier than usual. She had imagined this moment differently. She had thought if she could just explain, he would understand and forgive her. She had been wrong. She had left him, and now she was the one left behind. Her son, the boy she abandoned, would save her life, but he would never give his heart to her and would never have anything to do with her, ever. And as she was led away, tears slipped down her face. Grace Parker realized the cruelest truth of all. She had lost her son forever. If you enjoyed this story, kindly subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so that when new stories come on our channel, you'll be notified. Thank you, new subscribers on our channel. Thank you for old subscribers for also watching our videos. And for you who is watching this video and yet to subscribe, please hit the notification bell. Kindly share your comments in the comment section, and we'll see you in the next story. Bye.